The image is almost cinematic. Oil tankers leaving Venezuelan waters with their transponders switched off. No signal, no identity, just steel hulls carrying sanctioned oil into the dark. At first glance, this looks like smuggling. It is not. Within days, US forces intercept those ships. Some are seized, some are released. Others quietly turn back. And then something extraordinary happens. Oil executives are summoned to the White House. They are told security is guaranteed. They are told to deal directly with Washington, not Caracas. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and this is not really a story about Venezuela. It's a story about how power now works in the global system. Not through speeches, not through moral appeals, but through force, logistics, and control of flows. If you want to understand where the world is heading, stay with me, because what's happening here is not an exception. It's a template, and once you see it, you won't unsee it. Now, let's step back and ask the central question. What is actually at stake here? Let's define the problem clearly. What you're seeing is not a random escalation. It is a shift in how economic order is enforced. For years, Venezuela existed in a gray zone. Sanctions, limited trade, illicit networks adapted. Tankers learned to disappear. Oil kept moving just invisibly. That system worked until it didn't. The moment ships began sailing in dark mode, the issue stopped being about oil prices or legality. It became about control. Who decides which flows are allowed? Who guarantees security? And who ultimately captures the value? When US forces intercept tankers, and when Washington claims the right to manage the proceeds of Venezuelan oil, a new logic is revealed. This is not regime change through ballots. It is leverage through infrastructure. Oil fields matter less than ports. Governments matter less than supply chains. Sovereignty is no longer abstract, it's logistical. And once power is exercised this way, it rarely goes back. To understand how we arrived here, we need to rewind, not to last month, but to the deeper history that made this outcome almost inevitable. We need to go back before the seizures, before the tankers went dark, before the Marines arrived at dawn. Venezuela's oil story has always followed a cycle. Boom, dependence, collapse, control. For decades, oil revenues replaced institutions. The state didn't diversify, it concentrated. When prices were high, the system looked stable. When prices fell, everything underneath was exposed. Sanctions did not break this model. They hardened it. Cut off from formal markets, oil did not stop flowing. It rerouted, middlemen multiplied. Opacity became a feature, not a bug. This is how dark mode emerges, not as criminal genius, but as economic adaptation. When legal channels close, informal ones evolve. And over time, those informal systems begin to challenge state authority itself. At that point, the issue is no longer Venezuela's economy. It's the global order that tolerates parallel supply chains running outside its rules. History tells us what comes next. When informal flows grow too large, powerful states don't negotiate. They intervene, and that brings us to the first rupture, the moment when shadow systems collide with hard power. The rupture comes quietly, before it becomes unmistakably loud. A flotilla leaves Venezuelan waters, loaded tankers, empty escorts, transponders off, signals erased. This is not chaos, it's coordination. For a moment, the system holds. Ships move, oil flows. The shadow network works exactly as designed. Then, abruptly, it doesn't. One supertanker is intercepted, then another, a pre-dawn operation, Marines, seizure, release, and suddenly, uncertainty spreads through every hull still at sea. This is the first crisis, not because ships are stopped, but because predictability collapses. Markets can survive sanctions. They can survive corruption. What they cannot survive is ambiguity over force. When the United States demonstrates that it can reach out selectively, and shut flows down at will. The message travels faster than oil ever could. Insurance recalculates, captains hesitate, middlemen disappear. This is how power is exercised now. Not everywhere, just enough. If you're following closely, notice what's missing here. No grand announcement, no declaration of war, just enforcement, and that enforcement forces every actor to ask the same question. Who's really in charge? That question leads us directly into what matters most, the hidden machinery behind this system. What's happening beneath the surface is more important than the seizures themselves, because oil is not controlled at the wellhead anymore. It's controlled in transit. The real system is made of contracts, flags, insurers, ports, and payment channels. Change one node and the entire network recalibrates. When a tanker sails without a signal, it's not just hiding. It's opting out of the system that guarantees protection, financing, and legitimacy. That choice works until a stronger system intervenes. This is the hidden mechanism at play. Power today is modular. It doesn't need to occupy territory. It only needs to control choke points. By intercepting ships and then selectively releasing them, the United States sends a precise signal: compliance is rewarded, opacity is punished, and neutrality disappears. What replaces sanctions is something more sophisticated: managed access. Oil can move, but only under rewritten rules, and with proceeds supervised. This is not chaos, it's design. And once a system like this is installed, it doesn't stay confined to one country. It becomes portable, which brings us to the second escalation, the moment this logic begins to reshape not just Venezuela, but the people inside it. Now, let's shift perspective away from tankers and marines, away from flags and contracts, and toward you. Because when systems are redesigned at this level, they don't stay abstract. They land directly on ordinary lives. If you are a Venezuelan citizen, this moment feels deeply confusing. On one hand, there is the promise of stability, oil flowing again, jobs returning, money re-entering an economy that has been starved for years. On the other hand, control feels farther away than ever. Decisions about your country's most valuable resource are no longer made in Caracas. They are negotiated elsewhere, executed elsewhere, and enforced with weapons you don't command. You are told this is for your benefit. That proceeds will be managed. That security will bring prosperity. Maybe it will, but notice the trade-off. Stability without sovereignty, order without agency. And this is where the emotional core of the story lies. Because once people accept that survival requires external control, something subtle changes. Expectations shrink. Politics becomes distant. Hope becomes conditional. If this feels familiar, it should. Many societies are being asked to make the same bargain, and once made, it is very hard to reverse. That brings us to the global consequences, because this model does not stop at Venezuela. What's unfolding in Venezuela is being watched far beyond Latin America, because this is not just about one country's oil. It's about a method. When a major power demonstrates that it can combine military reach, financial oversight, and corporate coordination into a single system, others take notes. Friends, rivals, and fragile states in between. This approach changes geopolitical calculations. Energy producers learn that sovereignty now depends on compliance with external security guarantees. Importers learn that supply stability is no longer just a market issue, it's a strategic one. And the ripple effects spread quickly. Shipping routes are reassessed, insurance premiums adjust. States sitting on sanctioned or contested resources begin to ask a dangerous question. Who will control our flows if pressure arrives? This is how localized enforcement becomes global precedent, not through treaties, but through repetition. What makes this moment especially consequential is its quietness. No new doctrine is announced, no red lines are drawn. Yet the message is unmistakable. In a world of fractured rules, power belongs to those who can keep systems running or stop them. And once that becomes the norm, global order doesn't collapse. It reorganizes. The final question, then, is not whether this model will spread, it's how far and at what cost. That takes us to the future and the three paths now in front of us. From here, the future does not move in a straight line. It branches. There are three plausible paths and none of them are clean. The first is the optimistic scenario. Security holds, oil flows predictably, revenue stabilized, and, as promised, managed for public benefit. Over time, institutions slowly rebuild around a functioning economy. External control becomes lighter, then eventually unnecessary. Order creates the space for sovereignty to return. This is the best case outcome. It requires discipline, transparency, and restraint from power. The second path is the middle scenario, and historically, the most common. Oil flows, but dependence deepens. Stability exists, but only as long as external guarantees remain. Local institutions adjust around the system rather than replacing it. Growth occurs, but autonomy does not. The country works, but it does not decide. Then there is the worst-case scenario. Control hardens, managed access becomes permanent oversight, revenue flows upward and outward. Resentment builds quietly until it erupts. What was sold as stabilization is reinterpreted as extraction. History is unforgiving here. Systems built on force can function for a long time, but they rarely generate legitimacy. Which path emerges will not depend on oil prices alone. It will depend on whether power remembers its limits. And that brings us to the final insight, what this moment ultimately reveals about the world we are entering. Let me leave you with one final thought. For decades, we believed globalization would tame power, that markets would replace force, that integration would make coercion obsolete. What Venezuela shows us is the opposite. Power did not disappear. It reorganized. Today, influence is exercised through flows of oil, money, ships, and security. Those who control the flows don't need to govern directly. They only need to decide who moves and who doesn't. This is not a return to empire. It's something colder, more efficient, and far less visible. For countries like Venezuela, the lesson is painful but clear. Resources do not guarantee sovereignty. Control does. For the rest of us, for you, the warning is broader. As systems become more complex, the levers of power move farther from public view. And when that happens, democracy doesn't collapse overnight. It quietly thins out. If you found this analysis valuable, share it. Talk about it, because understanding power is the first step to holding it accountable. I'm Fareed Zakaria, and this is the world as it is, not as we wish it to be.